This is the new Audi S3, and it's been updated for the 2025 model year. It's a little hard to tell on the outside because it looks basically the same as the old one, but there are some big changes here, including more power and some other serious improvements to performance. The result is a surprisingly upgraded car, actually, and today I'm going to review this new Audi S3 and show you all of its quirks and features. If you've been watching my videos for a long time, you'll remember I used to take my cars to CarMax to see what they'd offer me as a trade-in value. These videos were fun and popular as they would often give me a wildly inaccurate number for the cars. Submit your cool car to Cars and Bids in just a few minutes, and you'll be connected with an auction manager from my team who will help your car go live on Cars and Bids, where you'll get way more money for your car than trading it in to a big box dealer. Look at how much these cars sold for on Cars and Bids compared to their trade-in value. Here's a trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Here's a trade-in value and the Cars and Bids result, and this was a trade-in value and this was the Cars and Bids result. Get started now and sell your car on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new S3, which, like I said, looks a lot like the old S3, but there are some pretty big upgrades under the skin, mechanical improvements, starting with a new torque-splitting differential. Now, this is borrowed from the RS3, the ultra high performance version of this car, and it allows power to go to each rear wheel individually. So all power can go to one side rear wheel depending on exactly what you need power for. The result is that this car should understeer less and feel a lot more playful and eager around corners. I'm not going to say you can get it sliding necessarily, although maybe you could, but regardless, it probably won't feel like as much of a front bias, front engine, kind of heavy front end car with this new differential. This is a pretty impressive trick to borrow from the RS3. If they're still trying to sell the more expensive RS3, you'd think they wouldn't drop this down to the S3, but they have for 25, and I'm eager to see how this car feels on the road. Now, beyond the new torque-splitting diff, you also have some improvements under the hood and the transmission for better acceleration. The same powertrain exists as before. It's a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, and you can see the plastic engine cover has 4 little panels painted red to emphasize the fact that it's a 4-cylinder. The universal symbol of the number of cylinders you have is painting lines on your engine cover. But the improvement here is power. The old S3 had 306 horsepower. The new one moves up to 328 horsepower. So just shy of 330 horses in a car this size. It's a pretty impressive figure. And Audi's made other improvements too. There's been an upgrade to the turbochargers, a new preload function that allows the turbos to spin faster and get the car into boost quicker for better acceleration, and shifting has been improved. Audi says in sport mode, when you're on it, shift speed has increased by up to 50%, which should also help to boost acceleration. The result, apparently, is a 0 to 60 time of around 4 seconds, which is exceptionally fast. Again, this isn't the RS3, just the regular old S3 does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, which is quick. And compared to its competitors, it's pretty spry. More power than the Mercedes-AMG CLA 35 and the Acura Integra Type S, and it's quicker 0 to 60 than both of those. It doesn't have as much power as the BMW M240i, but the acceleration time is about the same, and the new S3 is cheaper than all of those cars with a base price of right around $50,000 with shipping. It's cheaper than its rivals, more powerful, quicker. It all is pretty appealing. Now, aside from the updates under the skin, on the outside of the S3, again, changes are pretty minimal. You probably won't notice them, but I'll tell you anyway. The most obvious is around back. The rear diffuser is more pronounced, larger, more aggressive than the rear diffuser on the previous S3. You kind of would have to have the two cars next to each other to notice that, but it is sort of a more aggressive look back there. Up front, the grille design is a little bit different. It's basically the same look, but now it's fully surrounded by a body color panel
panel instead of a different piece of trim. Again, something you'd hardly notice unless you had the two cars next to each other. On the side, Audi tells me one change is that there's now laser etched wording in the B pillar. You can see it here, Audi on one side, and then S3 TFSI Quattro on the other. Again, a tremendously minimal change, but it's one they've made. You also have updates to the headlights and taillights, which again, pretty small. And on the outside, that's basically all you get. But there are some notable quirks on the outside of this car beyond just what's new. Going back to those headlights and taillights, how about the dance they do when you walk up to the car and unlock it? Starting with the taillights, you can see they do this cool little fun design dance to let you know that the car sees you and it's excited to see you, which is kind of a neat thing. You also have the same deal up front. You unlock the doors. You can see the headlights and running lights do this kind of cool, interesting dance, which is sort of a neat thing. Now, speaking of the running lights, very unusual design here. When the car is turned on, the running lights have this design pattern, which is definitely strange. Not every little light piece in the running light is turned on. Instead, it's intended to take on only a few of those pieces for the purpose of some sort of light design or pattern. It is a very unusual look when you see the running lights on, something I haven't really seen before. And when you turn on the turn signal, it gets even stranger because the turn signal is intended to kind of fill in for the extra light bricks that haven't been turned on the other part of the running light, but it also fills in some of the parts that are on. And the whole running light turn signal situation is weird in this car, but also kind of distinctive. You're going to look at that, you're going to think Audi S3, although you might also think those lights look broken. Aside from that, though, that's probably the only controversial part of the outside of this car. I got to tell you, I really like the way that this car looks. In an era where everybody's getting so aggressive with their designs and in your face, this car remains surprisingly restrained and simple and basic in a way that kind of only Audi is doing. BMW with their big grills and their wide fenders, some of that stuff looks good, but here I like the basic, subtle simplicity of this design. This car has always looked good, and it still looks good coming into the new generation. It's a nice look. And Audi has managed to keep the size relatively restrained as well. Again, in an era where everything's blowing up, getting larger and larger, the S3 stays about 177 inches long, which makes it actually a little shorter than the new BMW M240i, which has only 2 doors. This car, 4 doors and a smaller size. Again, pretty good packaging and decent restraint compared to so many other cars getting bigger, heavier, wider, longer. This one stays stylistically and sizically reasonable. And next we move inside the new S3, where there's actually even fewer changes in here than there are on the outside. The biggest and most notable change is to the shifter, which loses an actual shifter and becomes this like switch that you pull down to go into drive or up to go into reverse. Park is a button on top. That's your new Audi shifter. It's in other new Audi models as well, and now it's made its way into the S3. Aside from that, the press materials that Audi sent me about this car talked about other interior changes, specifically the, quote, refinished door grab handles and the new painted cup holder surround. Folks, when you're talking about a new painted cup holder surround, that's how you know the interior hasn't changed at all. Fortunately, there are quite a few interesting quirks in this interior, new and old, that are worth mentioning that we can talk about. Starting with those door handles, you can see they're rather strange. Refinished or not, they have this sort of curve down, they're angled in this weird way. It's definitely an interesting and distinctive door handle. It actually makes opening the door kind of feel like a more interesting experience than in other cars, so it's kind of a neat quirk. And of course, the grab handles below those door handles are refinished, which is a nice benefit, according to Audi. Next up, another nice quirk in this interior, something I really like about this car actually, is the quick controls for the stereo mounted here in the center console. You can see this little circular pad allows you to quickly change next track, previous track, turn it on and mute it. And if you circle your finger sliding around this little circle pad, it also adjusts the volume up or down. So this is also a volume knob kind of cleverly integrated into this control panel. That's an interesting idea because it means if you want to make a simple change to the stereo. You don't have to go into the infotainment system to do it. It's cool to have this quick control panel right here. Another interesting quirk in this car, in the interior, you can see on the door panel, you have this sort of unusual ambient lighting design with these little like dashes of light on the door panel integrated and on when the car is running. Interestingly, these dashes of light can be adjusted to various different colors, which are named Contour, Vision, Solar, Impulse, and Maritime. None of those make sense. They don't actually describe the color that they are, except maybe solar if it's yellow, but those are your color choices, and you can adjust your ambient lighting to any of those colors, and then your interesting door panel dash lighting will also adjust as well. Next up, here's a rather interesting quirk about this car. You take a look at the seats, you can see there's a little Audi S logo that's sort of embossed into the leather on the seats. That's not really all that surprising. A lot of cars have that, but the weird thing is this is the old Audi S logo, using the old font with the S sort of hanging off into the little red slash. If you actually go to the back of the car, you will notice there is a new Audi S logo where you have the red slash and then the S is separate and using a new font. Strangely enough, you go back to the inside of the car and you can see the steering wheel also has the old Audi S logo, which is a surprising mishmash of new and old. And if you check the key, you will notice that that has the new Audi S logo, again, the red and then the S. Now, this is a fairly minor point, I must concede, but it is weird to see one vehicle use both old and new logos. Usually automakers put so much thought into the corporate logo structure that they don't make this mistake, and frankly, the old logo just looks better. Having the S in the slash instead of weirdly hanging out next to it, it was much better before, but they've changed it now. Still, it's nice to see the interior still carries the old logo, so you don't have to look at the worse new one. And next up, here's another interesting quirk about this car. To the left of the steering wheel, you have your headlight controls. You can see them all here, pretty standard stuff. The unusual part is that they're sort of partially capacitive touch. If you run your finger over the main control on the left, an icon pops up in your gauge cluster letting you know what the headlights currently are switched to, whether they're on or off or on automatic. And that way you don't actually have to turn your eyes away from the road to see where your headlights are. Instead, you just tap the control and it shows you in the gauge cluster, which is a pretty cool feature. It's actually nice to see that. And then obviously if you press that control, the gauge cluster will show you exactly what you've selected. So again, you don't have to avert your eyes from the road when you're changing your headlights, which is nice. Now, one other interesting light-related item here is the central light control is the front fog lights, although apparently Audi has renamed these the all-weather lights. I guess they don't want you thinking they're only for use in fog, because honestly, fog lights can be useful in a lot of different conditions. So now instead of calling them fog lights, Audi's calling them all-weather lights. It's kind of an interesting change, but I guess it does make sense. Now, moving on to the gauge cluster screen, you can see it here. There's a lot to like about this gauge cluster. Other Audi models use it, and I've always said great things because I love everything about it. It's tremendously configurable and very easy to configure using simple buttons on the steering wheel instead of going into menus like so many other cars have. You just tap the buttons, you can move to a full screen map or to show you the music or different types of views depending on what information you want displayed. This is one of the best gauge cluster systems in the car business. Audi's been using it for years and it's still one of the best, and it's great to see they're still using it. And since we're talking screens, next we move on to the infotainment screen, which in this car is pretty good. It's not a huge screen like in so many rival cars, but the result of that is that means they haven't integrated the climate controls into this infotainment screen. In fact, the climate controls have their own dedicated set of buttons and switches below the screen, and actually the climate controls are surprisingly intuitive to use. It's all pretty easy to figure out in a way that a lot of cars that integrate the climate controls into the screen aren't necessarily quite so easy. Now, the screen itself is intuitive, it's responsive, it's easy to figure out, it's all pretty simple stuff, and it makes sense to use. And one thing it does integrate is the controls for the drive mode for this car. In order to adjust the drive mode, you tap on this little button below, it says Drive Select, and then from there you go into the screen to choose the specific drive mode that you want. And there's sort of an auto mode, a basic mode, there's also dynamic, which is where you get the car sportier. And once you've selected dynamic mode, you can then then separately select the Dynamic Plus mode that really allows you to take full advantage of the tighter shifting, the quicker spooling turbos, and that rear torque splitting differential. You have to select Dynamic, then select Dynamic Plus, so it's like two confirmations. It turns off traction control. It really sporties up the car. You can hear it. It's tighter throttle response. It's really noticeable, but you make that change and you get this car in its sportiest possible drive mode. By the way, one other thing worth mentioning, one quirk before I go into the back seat, something I still love about Audis is the sunroof situation. Specifically, the sunshade is perforated, so it allows a little bit of sun in. But the cool part is you can open up the sunroof separate from the sunshade, meaning you can have the sunroof open but the shade closed, and you can get some wind into the cabin through the perforations but not necessarily get blasted with sun. It's a really cool feature. Only Audi does it, the separately opening sunshade and sunroof, and I like to see it. Every time I'm in a new Audi, I'm reminded of the fact that I think that's a pretty cool and frankly kind of well thought out, clever feature. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the new S3, which of course is tight, as you'd expect for a vehicle this size in this segment, but it's not intolerable back here. I have the front seat position where I would sit as someone who's 6'4", and I'm actually doing okay sitting in the back. It's not tremendously comfortable, but it's acceptable, which is better than I was expecting. I thought it would be really, really cramped back here, but it's not. Now, one other impressive feature, you have climate vents for the back seat. They're very small, but they are here, which is unusual to see in a car in this segment. Most do not have rear climate vents. That's cool. Now, you don't really have rear seat climate controls back here. You do have this little slider that allows you to choose between hot and cold, but you can't change the fan speed. You can't change the air placement. You just kind of choose hot, cold, and these are your little vents. Still, it's nice to have a little bit of comfort and some thought for the rear passengers. That's cool to see. Of course, you also have two USB-C ports back here, as you can see, for device charging, and you have a center back seat, so you can sit 3 across back here, but this center seat is all but unusable because of the giant hump in the floor. It's very hard for the center passenger to have anywhere to put their feet. Nonetheless, there is a center seat that you can use in an absolute pinch if you completely had to. Aside from that, nothing particularly exciting in the back seat. It is nice to see that they've basically replicated all the trim and luxury from the front and back, including the red diamond stitching on the seat, sort of a sporty atmosphere back here. It's not really decontented in the back, except you lose those cool light dashes on the door panel. Instead, you just get a simple, non-lighted Alcantara piece. Aside from that, actually a pretty decent back seat for spending time. And finally, we move on to the trunk, the cargo area in the new S3. It's actually fairly large. Again, this car is pretty well packaged considering its small size. You get decent trunk space back here, although it's worth pointing out that the opening for the trunk is surprisingly small. It would be nice if this was a hatchback with a lift back so you could get more stuff in here. Instead, you have a fairly small opening, but it works okay. Now, a few interesting things worth pointing out. For one, there's a little panel to the left in the trunk where you could store smaller items, which would be nice. And you also have a power outlet directly in front of that, so you can power stuff back here. It's a cigarette lighter style outlet, not household, but it's still nice to see a power outlet in the trunk, which can be useful for various things. You also have, coming down from the ceiling, the roof of the trunk, this little hook, which is for grocery bags. If you have something fragile like eggs or milk, you don't want them spilling around in back, you can hook it onto this hook and then it will stay put, which is nice to see. And speaking of hooks, the other interesting thing about this trunk is you can lift up the floor of the trunk, and the handle for lifting actually doubles as a hook that keeps the trunk floor in place and gives you access to like the battery and other mechanical components below the trunk without kind of constantly falling down on you. That's a relatively cool feature to have and kind of a clever idea, the hook handle, and allowing you easy access to your trunk. I will say, despite the clever packaging and space back here, one drawback to this cargo area, you cannot drop the rear seats from the trunk. A lot of cars have like latches you can pull from the trunk area to drop the back seats. Not the case here. The back seats do drop, but you have to go to the seats individually and do it, which adds a little bit of complication. Not significant, but still a little less convenient than in some other cars. But lots to say about the S3. Mostly I'm curious about how it drives, since the biggest changes to this car are mechanical. So let's get it out on the road and check out the new S3. All right, driving the new S3. Now, it's a little wet today, so I can't really push this like I'd want to, but I have had this for a week and I've been driving it around quite a bit, and I gotta say, I am quite impressed with this car. You know, the S3 is sort of the entry-level, basest performance car in the Audi world, and so it doesn't get a lot of cred. Like, there's not a lot of people are like, oh, it's only an S3. But this particular one, it has an enormous amount of stuff going for it. In fact, it has so much stuff going for it that I'm kind of surprised that they would give it this much performance and sporty feel, considering that they still have to make, sell, and market an RS3. Now, when I'm making this video, the new RS3, the updated RS3, has not yet been announced, but it will be in the next few days. By the time it goes up, you'll know what the RS3 is, and maybe it will make more sense. Maybe the RS3 is getting even more crazy with even more insane stuff, and this car won't feel like it'll kind of steal some of the enthusiasm for the RS3. But from where I sit now, I'm sitting in this car thinking to myself, why do I need an RS3? This starts at 50 grand. It's a relative bargain compared to the RS3. You now have the RS3's diff, which I don't want to say it changes the whole experience dramatically, but it does make the car feel like it understeers less and feel playful is the right word. Like, it feels sportier. It feels more like a rear-wheel drive car, honestly. It feels like bouncier side to side. You can kind of throw it around into corners more and get more engagement out of it, which is what you're hoping for from an RS3. Well, now it's delivered an S3. Now, you pair that with the fact that this car has now 330 horsepower and does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. I mean, that is a really serious 0 to 60 time. Like, this is a pretty impressive car. And there's a lot to like here, especially when you consider also the price point. Now, I will say, you know, this is still the entry-level Audi. It still looks like the entry-level Audi. It's still small. Some of the interior stuff is not at the quality level that, you know, other, like an RS6 would be at, for example. But from a pure driving perspective and from an enjoyment perspective, I am really impressed with this car. I think the powertrain is like tremendously punchy and potent and exciting to like get going. And they claim the turbo spools faster, the shifts are quicker. It's been a long time since I've driven the old S3. I don't really remember, but it does feel exceptionally quick, both from a non-turbo lag perspective and from a shifting perspective. I mean, this is now a fast car. It feels like a lot of like refinement and improvement went into making this car like a really viable and serious performer, which is so great in every respect unless you're trying to sell an RS3. I mean, this car is just so punchy and little. You know, I've always made this thing about how when I was in college 20 years ago, I loved my B5 Audi A4. It was just the perfect size and the perfect amount of like toss it aroundness. And that's exactly what this car feels like. This car feels like a B5, except obviously an S4, or I guess it would be an RS4 with this performance level. It feels really quite eager and exciting and fun to drive and enjoy. It really is. Frankly, it's hard to find much to complain about this car at this price point. When you think about this car compared to rivals and what rivals offer, this car is more powerful, it's quicker. I don't feel a lot of torque steer. I don't feel understeer. It's a pretty impressive car for only an S3, and I think there's a lot to like about this car. All right, now I'm going to take it out of the sporty dynamic plus mode here, and I'm just going to go back into sort of an auto drive mode, because I also want to talk about and think about how this car would be as sort of a regular daily driver. Again, I've driven it around for the last week quite a bit, and I gotta say, it would actually be pretty good as a regular daily driver. Once you take it out of the dynamic mode, obviously the turbo lag is laggier, the shifts are not as tight, but the result of that stuff is the car generally feels smoother, more controllable, and less frenetic. From a ride quality perspective, it's still a little bit harsher than I think I would probably want in a regular daily driver. It's something that I would put up with for all the other benefits that this car offers, but that is something that you lose by getting sort of the entry-level kind of smaller vehicle. But now, I mean, driving around in regular mode, I can really feel the shifts are smoother, everything's like less crazy, and the car just drives like relatively normally, but with a nice interior. And you wouldn't even really know that you could go out there, you know, on back roads on the weekends and just slam it around and have crazy fun with it. And I think that's a cool thing about this car. It has kind of a dual personality. More and more cars, because technology improvements have made it possible, more and more cars are offering these dual personalities, and this car, I think, does a really good job with it. I think it would be a great commuter, but I think it would also be like a fun throw it around car. I'm sure RS3 will still be a very, very compelling vehicle, but from where I sit right now, I think that 90% of people would probably be just fine with this car and be like totally thrilled and pretty excited to drive it. And I definitely fall into that camp. I think that this is a fun and exciting car, and I think it's pretty impressive for what it offers. If you miss the old days of the E46 BMW and the B5 Audi A4 and all those kind of littler cars, it's nice that we're in a world where there is a segment full of those cars once again after a long absence, with the Integra Type S, also a fantastic car, with this, with the CLA, with the M235, M240. And it's nice to have all these cars kind of back competing against each other in the little class, and they're all pretty compelling. But I gotta say, like, this one on paper and from a driving perspective probably edges out the competition for what it can provide, unless you really want that manual in the Integra. And I don't fault you for that, and it's a great manual, and that too is a great car, but this is also a very, very impressive one. And so that's the new 2025 Audi S3. I know, it's only an S car and not the really cool RS3, but this car is actually surprisingly good in a lot of ways. Excellent performance and power, frankly, attractive styling, nice technology, and reasonable pricing. If you can't afford an RS3, this car makes it so you don't have to make excuses for your S3 anymore. And now it's time to give this car a DOUGSCORE. And the DOUGSCORE is here, 62 out of 100, which puts the new S3 here against some rivals. It only beats the old S3 by a point, which makes sense as most of the change here is incremental and not necessarily enough to add significant advantages in each category. But the new S3 is improved and impressively so. Given its price point, performance, interior quality, and practicality level, I think the new S3 is probably the most desirable car in its segment, as much as I love the fantastic Acura Integra Type S and its wonderful powertrain. Then again, the Type S has 3 pedals and a hatchback, which keeps it right there in the running. Mostly, I'm just happy to have such fantastic options available at this relatively affordable price point.